Are you finding anxiety as something in your life that has become debilitating, perhaps worry and fear, perhaps even leading to depression and causing you to move into cycles of coping mechanisms that are not necessarily helping you? Today, I really want to talk about some really kind of eight key concepts about anxiety. Some of them may actually be interesting or maybe different than what you think. The first thing about anxiety is that it can actually be a dual force. And what I mean by that is actually the sort of the tantric or even the Buddhist ideal that things don't have really necessarily inherent value. They have the value of what we give to them. And what I mean by that is that anxiety can both have a negative and a positive potential. It's really more of a debilitating force when it's unmanaged, but it can also be a motivator and a source of growth when harnessed effectively. In other words, when you feel anxiety kick in, you can understand that that is simply a mismatch in perhaps your energy fields, that maybe it's a mismatch between what you're expecting or what you think should be and where you perceive things to be. And so what you can do about that is you can, number one, you can perhaps reframe your own thinking around it, or perhaps number two, you can create yourself some actual action steps. Perhaps you are being called by your higher being or yourself to really move into a different space to change things around. And that is where the anxiety is coming from. It's simply, I often feel as though I have a foot both on the gas and on the brake at the same time. And perhaps it's because you're fearful about making a change or moving into a new space. So, anxiety can be a motivator for change as well because it does build up a lot of energy. And so you can use that energy that's being built up in a lot of different ways. I think one of the most harmful things is if you have a lot of anxiety, you just kind of sit still, then what can happen is your mind just kind of revs up even higher. And a lot of times we move into coping mechanisms like overeating or perhaps drinking or something else, some type of behavior like that that does not necessarily benefit us. And at the end of the day, with anxiety, you can even do things. Perhaps your coping mechanism can be to go take a walk or to work out or do something physical of that nature, walk in nature, to where you can kind of just get that movement because oftentimes anxiety is about uh, something wanting us to get into a space of movement, whether it's actually changing something in our life or just physically moving. And so, if we can physically move, that can absolutely change it. Something about also about anxiety is there's a lot of neurobiology that's really attached to it. Anxiety stems from a brain body threat detection system involving the amygdala and the hypothalamus. And the system is reacting to stressors by preparing the body for action, which is fight, flight, or freeze. So again, we move into the idea that we can use anxiety to know that it is time to move forward or to get that movement. The problem with the neurobiology of anxiety is that we can create these repetitive patterns where we sort of stay in these stress and anxiety responses, and that can really lead to maladaptive responses and health issues that can happen because it's almost like putting too much electricity or too much water pressure through a pipe over an extended period of time, and eventually you wear out that system. So your body, your neurobiology can handle certain short-term levels of stress and anxiety, but if that becomes your norm, that's where problems actually start to occur for yourself, both mentally and physically, and in other ways. But through neuroplasticity, the brain has the ability to change and to allow us to rewire our response to anxiety, like by taking mindfulness, exercise, cognitive reframing, all those things that we've already talked about. And once that becomes your norm of how you respond to anxiety, then that can absolutely change. One thing that I do a lot of times when I am in anxiety is I will pick up my set of mala beads and I will begin a meditation. And this can be like while I'm walking around, even like working or doing things. I've often actually been stopped by coworkers who say, "What are you saying? Or are you talking to me?" I'm like, "No, I'm just doing a mantra in my head." And it's interesting. Sometimes I find with those mantras that it's more helpful to me if I just pick a particular just word, perhaps like peace or love or joy or abundance. And sometimes if I add like an I am statement to it, that seems to give it more emphasis. Or if there's a certain occurrence or situation or something that I associate with whatever that is that I want to feel, I might make it like that. I might create like a scenario and just repeat repetitively say that over and over again. And I might often might do that while walking around or doing something even just slightly physical. And it seems to really kind of move my brain out of that system and give me a new pattern of how I work with anxiety and how I move it through. I mean, now that once you realize that, perhaps you are a person that is prone to anxiety, and things that worry and those types of things, it's simply about how do you reframe it, how do you use it, how do you move through that. So there are some emotion regulation strategies, such as situation selection, situation modification, attention deployment, cognitive change, response modulation. These are all different types of strategies that we can use to really regulate our emotions. And if you are a follower of Abraham Hicks, you understand, you know about the idea of the emotional guidance scale, and that your job isn't to get from, say, despair to joy. Your job is simply to get up to the next level. And you can actually get excited even if you're in what we would call lower vibrational situations or emotions, if you realize that you've just gone up the scale a little bit, because it is going to feel better. It is going to give you more ease at that time. And often, Abraham Hicks says that the best thing to do is just to go to sleep, and that can be helpful as well. Um, Another thing that can be really helpful is to um, use reframing anxiety as a tool. It gives you really a lot of ideas about your personal values and priorities, and perhaps you can see it as a way to feel better, because you do have higher standards for yourself. So perhaps the idea that you do have anxiety actually may be something that you can see as a positive aspect of yourself, because if you didn't have that anxiety, maybe you're seeing yourself as really having a lower viewpoint of yourself, a lower viewpoint of what is possible. Because we're often taught in our in the energy fields that if you can imagine it, that means it is possible. So if you are thinking that things should be different, then that means that there is even the possibility for you to think of it as being present, and for you to actually for you to actually experience it. So the brain has a default to prioritize and remember negative emotions over positive ones. That's because we've been trained by our brain to look for threats. So understand that this is simply a normal bias that the brain has, but it's time for you to start taking control over your brain to realize, and you can usually nip this in the bud. Abraham Hicks again teaches that if we fall out of an airplane, sometimes we just have to do that hard landing because we've already gone too far. But if you start recognizing your own patterns of anxiety, that's something that you can kind of catch early. And that's often why I talk about it pretty openly, because I realize that the more hidden I keep that anxiety, worry, fear, depression, the more it grows, because things like that, they grow in the dark. But if you call them out and you say, this is what's happening for me right now, and you really investigate it and you really kick in your support systems, whether that be people or It can even be, taking a walk or exercising or petting, or spending some time with your pet or reading or whatever it might be. Whatever might be a positive thing that you might have to use as your support system. When you start, recognizing the patterns earlier, you can catch it earlier, and then you don't have to do that hard landing. But if as you get more and more experience with dealing with anxiety and learning your own patterns and learning how it works for you, you can start integrating more of these into your lifestyle so that you already naturally have a pattern that helps you to deal with it. Oftentimes, when I have that decision of, am I going to eat this, or am I not going to eat this or eat that instead? Am I going to go work out? Am I going to, whatever it might be? I understand and I know how I feel if I do this, and I know how I feel if I do this, and I know which one I prefer. And so, even though I may not want to do the thing that ultimately is the best, I may not want to go to the gym, I may not want to do those things, I may want to just lay in bed and whatever. I also know how that's going to feel later on. And so I make it an investment or a gift to myself because I know that I will really appreciate it later on if I've done sometimes what would be the quote unquote the hard thing. And that's something that you understand as you really work with this more and more. And as you make those changes, as you start creating those mental patterns and those repetitive lifestyle change patterns in your life, they become easier and easier to make, and it becomes habit for you. And then that's simply who you are. So at the end of this, what I guess really want to make sure you understand is that anxiety, worry, fear, depression, those are natural and normal emotions. We're also wired that way so that we can stay in a safe place, because the thing you've heard before about, how we were trained to run away from the saber-toothed tiger. Only now that very infrequently happens, but we still have that chemistry set up. But also that you are in a place where your empowerment comes from recognizing it really early and start discovering what patterns actually benefit you. Perhaps it's, drinking water or taking a drive or going for a walk or talking to a friend or whatever it might be. So the more things that you have in your wheelhouse that help you to work through those things, the more tools that you have, the more effective you can be, and the earlier that you can catch it. And the earlier you catch these things, the better off you are. And I know one of the things that really helps me is to actually just record helpful things such as this. So I'm helping myself by being here and being present. And I also work with the angelic world too. And so Archangel Michael helps to protect us and also helps to motivate us and to let us know what is possible for ourselves. So if you are in a real state of anxiety and you feel like there's a threat or something like that, I would ask you to ask Archangel Michael to come forward and give you guidance as how to stay safe and what you could do in the situation to really excel. And with that, I will say love, peace, release, and until next time.